This is the first design open house I'm doing. So I just want to give you a brief introduction about the open house, how it's going to proceed, and of course it is just be good and stock. Yeah. So this, like I said, is the first open house. We're going to have one every month. So that means we'll have one design talk each month so that we can get the required push. So why we're doing this story? You guys read stories. So there were three monks, and they were all meditating by a river. And one of them suddenly gets up telling that, "Oh my God, I forgot to dry my clothes." So he quickly walks on the water and goes on the other side and dries his clothes and comes back. And the second monk is meditating and he again quickly gets up and he walks over the water and does his stuff and comes back. The third guy is quite frustrated. He thinks that all of us have been meditating to the same amount of time, and these guys have attained some supernatural powers which I don't have. So he sits in silence for some time and then gets up to walk onto the water and he falls into the water. He comes back, sits again, says some mantra or something, and again falls into the water. So he keeps doing this again and again. And the other two guys, they open their eyes and they go, "Should we tell him where the stones are?" So basically this is what we're trying to do. The open house, people have in the industry of course, people have an idea that design is very mystical and so magical that designers are looked at as if walking on water. So we're trying to have talks here, tell you where the stones are if you don't know them. So each talk, of course today's talk is going to be about learning about Playful tangible interfaces. So Dhruv is going to just tell you where the stones are, and in this way we all take back a lot into our own fields. So if you know, of course this is the first talk, from the next month onward, if you want to give a talk, okay, or if you know anybody who would like to give a talk on design, you can please contact one of us, and you can be about the next open house. So it could be anything. It could be what you're working on. It could be an experience that you had while you were working on something. Or it could be as small as, okay, I read this design book, or I watched this design documentary, and this is what I understood, and this is what I implemented, and this is how the face of my product changed, or the way it works changed, and this is how it helps me. So just to share the best practices. Yeah. So about Dhruv Saxena, he's the speaker for today. He is currently leads the design and dev studio at Uncommon.
Just leave the design practice.
Okay. And he's a alumnus of CIID, which is a Copenhagen Institute of International Design, and also IISc. So Dhruv is going to be talking about playful tangible interfaces, and I hand it over to Dhruv. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, it hurts. I get really punches at people. I think they can still see you. Really love that. That was perfect. Okay, that was I think the third thing is more thank you everyone for meeting me here on Friday evening at 7:30. Before I actually proceed, I'd like to ask you guys some questions, and one of those you already answered by telling what you guys do right now. I wanted to get a feel of the design dev mix and see if there are any artists in the crowd. Apart from that, I want to know how many of you are here for the 3 beer? Some honesty. That's why I always go in blocks. But I don't know if there is 3 beers. There is. So I'm glad I did. Getting apart. I'm talking about playful tangible interfaces. But before I delve into that, I'd like to open with a little bit about my journey. So, over the course of my career, I've worn many hats. That of an engineer, designer, hobbyist. Some of these I have actually have degrees in, and so on these I mostly stumbled upon. I started with product design back in 2010. I was doing my mechanical engineering at Germany in Delhi. During the final days of my engineering there, I realized that I don't really know what to do in my life. And somebody said something about design and I got interested. I thought I'd give it a shot. And luckily enough, I got admitted at IISc to do the design program, which I finished in 2012. Thereafter, IISc actually taught me a lot about design that I know. And at that time, IISc had just opened up a research center, Bosch at Panvel. And that's when I actually started delving into interaction design. 2013, I mostly trained myself in programming, and I still don't call myself a programmer because there are some actual programmers in the crowd. So I use the term creative coder. I also was surrounded by a lot of hardware engineers at that point, and I picked up a lot of hardware stuff. And I was more or less responsible for designing the hardware interaction of the product. So at that point, it hit me that I am actually doing interaction. And I applied to CID, and luckily enough, I got it. For a year, I was there. That was one of the most transformative years of my life. I'm sure some people in the crowd can testify to that. And after I finished the course, I came back to Bangalore. Met some nice folks at Anupam who invited me over and basically burdened me with leading their design practice. And right now I do user experience design there. So I'll jump right into the meat of the topic. Right? What's a tangible interface? How many of you have an idea of what it is? A show of hands. Nobody?
Two. Oh, there are a couple of hands here.
Okay.
Three. I see.
People haven't raised their hand, but I'll jump into the definition as how I see it. This isn't a dictionary definition, it's something that I put together. The way I see it is that it's an interface which allows the users to grab and manipulate some information in the digital space, which exists in the digital space, but it's manipulated in the physical space. And the effects of that manipulation are seen back in the digital space. Anybody care to give an example? Something comes to mind?
A mouse.
That's a great example. So I was just going to use that as well. So when you look at a mouse, you manipulate that in the physical space and you see what happens as a consequence in the digital space. And that definition is really quickly changing. One of the pioneers in this field is the Tangible Media Group at MIT Media Labs. And they have sort of removed the feedback back into the digital space from the definition. It's become much more seamless. So you are actually manipulating digital information, but you are doing it in the physical space, and nothing is actually going back into the digital space. So you can imagine how this will transform the future, right? And this is exactly why it's important. How many of you still use a mouse? And I think the mouse was introduced to us in close to the 1970s in the mother of all demos. Right? At least Engelbart showed us this magical device which you can look at. I'm sure if anybody has seen that demo, you will realize the power of that demonstration. It's a long demo, but I would recommend that you go back and see what you have. And why is it that a device like the mouse hasn't really gone out of fashion in 50 years? I mean, everything has changed in 50 years. Startups are launching rockets. They're building, we are 3D printing biomaterials, but we're still using the mouse. So, I think that interfaces like these are going to grow more and more, and now so you know that the technology for that is in place. At a certain point of time, there was no technology to help facilitate small devices being in your homes. But now every device that you have in your house, houses are filled with multiple computers, and in the next 10 years or so, they are going to be completely filled with computers. And if you think about it, if those computers still have screens, wouldn't it really be very boring? Like you go walk this screen, you go walk to that screen. And what is the benefit of having so many distributed devices, which are physical in nature, if you are not able to leverage their physical presence? Tangible interfaces are something which allow you to take advantage of their affordances, where a computer does not feel like a computer. But most of you are from the digital design sphere, and you all know that there are a lot of guiding principles today to help you design. There's material design, there's iOS guidelines, and so on. But there's nothing really for tangible interfaces, and there isn't likely to be something that's going to come up in the near future. So I've been contemplating this for a while, and over the course of designing such things, I think I came up with some principles, and I sort of completed this list for myself last year. I see all these as the principles of designing tangible interfaces. They're just four, and they're really simple to follow. And as a takeaway of this talk, I wanted to give you something more tangible. Wasn't a fun way, but I'll start with the first one. We should get to the second. Doesn't matter. Interest, right? This seems like very obvious advice. Why shouldn't any design have an interesting story behind it? But you'll be surprised how easily this advice is missed, especially in tangible interfaces. When you look at a mobile app, right, when you're designing for that, you don't have to explain to the user what a mobile phone is or what an app is. But when you're building a tangible interface, you're building a completely new thing. And if you're not building something new, it's not interesting process. And when you're building a new machine, imagine that you're the first designer of a mobile app and people don't know what a mobile phone is. Can you actually tell an interesting story? You would be bombarded with questions about the device, about what an app is. And it's really difficult, and a lot of designers get caught up in talking about the construction of the device and forget to tell a story about it. So I'm going to open with, throughout this talk, I'm going to go over some of the projects that I've done. And I'm going to open with an installation, the brief for which was, should be an installation that can be used in Science Museum to explain the Trojan virus to kids. You see me doing here is I'm holding a colored ball in my hand, and you see in the background as a consequence of that something is moving towards the red. So using very simple shapes to tell a complex story is what we try to do here. The idea was to explain the Trojan virus through that installation, and I guess I understand.
Excuse me. Could you speak a little louder?
Sure, I'll try. Do we have? It's fine. I'll be a little.
Trojan 77 is a machine developed by designers at CIID in the late 70s to explain the intricacies of the notorious Trojan virus to the layperson. When the machine was first developed, the virus itself was in its infancy, unknown to most users of the personal computer. Although highly criticized at the time for inventing a seemingly useless machine, the visionaries at CIID were proven right when the Trojan became an epidemic in the 90s. Rediscovered in 2015 in the basement of CIID, the machine has since found its place in the Museum of All Things Dangerous. To explain the intricacies of the virus, designers of Trojan 77 built their machine using the metaphor of a maze, with the players having the perspective of the hacker. The ball represents the Trojan virus. The player must get the ball to stop at certain touch points by tilting the structure back and forth. Each touch point holds valuable data, such as passwords or pictures. Once a touch point is hit, the data gets pulled through a port that the hacker can access. If successful, the virus will crash the system when the final touch point is reached. When the machine was rediscovered, designers from CIID brought it to life by recreating its functions with open source, present-day technology. Although the Trojan 77 had to be refurbished, the hidden simplicity and the blueprints of its original design manages to amaze even present-day technologists.
One of the tragedies of my life is my name is misspelled everywhere. Today I just realized when I watched this video that it was misspelled here as well. So I had to scratch it out. Anyways, that's sort of a funny take on an installation that we had. And the most interesting part about this work was that this work was completed in 3 days, but it took us about more than a week to actually write the script, shoot, edit, re-edit, and so on. So the next time you're designing a tangent interface, think about telling a story. Just don't think about making a machine. The second one that I think is equally important is inhibiting the user. This is the famous Dhruv Saxena mouse that I was talking about. The mouse in 1968 had 3 buttons and just had windows to move the cursor around. It's still the same machine in 50 years. Because it can, even with that many number of controls, allow you to do a lot more. And when it comes to tactical interfaces, if you are going to give your users a lot to do with it, people are going to be confused. They're not going to be able to receive what you've built. And because it's more likely that, very likely that people are encountering such a machine for the first time. An example of this is I think 2014 work. This is a device that I built with a friend, which detects whistles from a pressure cooker. It's a really simple device. To tell you a little more about it, no, it doesn't work based on sound. It sits on top of a pressure cooker. It has a little complexity inside of it, but it had to be a device which was sealed, and for multiple reasons it could not have many buttons on it. Right? It's a handheld device, it's this small. So we ended up building the device with just 2 buttons, and those 2 buttons actually do a lot. So the one button that you see on the left, you have a similar button on the opposite side of the device, and that is what is used to set, increase or decrease the number of whistles that you want to detect. It's also used to wake up the device. It's also used to display how many whistles are left. Right? Quickly go through what we do this.
Pressure cookers are supposed to make cooking easy, but sometimes they can make things very difficult. Has it ever happened to you that you placed the cooker on the stove and just then a friend called and you got busy catching up? Or maybe you got involved in a game, or got caught up in something else, and you completely lost track of cooker whistles, which led to uncooked or even overcooked food. But don't worry, we have a solution. Introducing Cuckoo, a device that keeps track of pressure cooker whistles. Using Cuckoo is a tape deck. Just set the desired number of whistles on your Cuckoo and place it on top of your cooker. Now every time your cooker whistles, the cooker displays the remaining number of whistles. And don't worry if you cook on more than one river at a time. Cuckoo is smart enough to differentiate between whistles from separate cookers. When all the whistles are done, Cuckoo lets you know by sounding off a buzzer. Cuckoo pays attention to your cooker so that you can pay attention to the things you love.
I see people sleeping in the back. Wake up, guys. The third principle, interplay. I think most modern devices have this. The picture you see here is one of the most famous haptic feedback robots. Still used, it's called the Phantom robot. It's used for, before virtual reality came into play, this sort of robot was used for doing 3D models, it was used for digital sketching. It was also used to do complex operations, training doctors how to do endoscopy and so on. And the way it works is that the information that you feed the device, which is your force, corresponding to what you're manipulating, it feeds back some information to you, and you feel the resistance. So if you're drawing on a paper, you'll feel a different sort of resistance. If you're drawing on hardwood, it will allow you to feel something. This is actually this is more experimental than most of mine, but it's actually one of my favorite projects because of the complexity of building. This was something that doesn't actually relate to any of the other principles that I'm talking about. It is purely about building. So, in this bad GIF that you see here, you see me manipulating a motorized slide. As a consequence, you see a hinge pushing sort of a slab down and wall actually popping up. So that wall goes into this device and it's an inverted hammer. And you see multiple sensors of it which actually have sounds to an existing soundscape. And a couple of people can actually use this together. It becomes a competitive gaming sort of thing. The interesting bit here was that this motorized slider that you see, it is corresponding to the tension that's building up in that hinge. It's sort of like you're pumping air into a tire, and as you pump more and more air into it, you feel the friction increasing. So you feel something similar. And as soon as you pump more air than you needed to, the tire bursts, and you get the same feeling of the pump actually going loose. is one of the fathers of interaction design. There are two people who coined the term together. Bill Moggridge was living in 2012, who is the co-founder of IDEO, and Bill Moggridge, who is still healthy and fit. And he teaches at CID, and his level of commitment to his work is just amazing. I think he's touching his 80s, but if I remember correctly, he was there every morning at 7 and left at 10:30 in the night, soldering these boards alongside me. Amazing work. And the final one, which I think is the most important of these principles, is interact. It's after all interaction design. Physical devices have that affordance, like I said before, that they can respond to humans, and humans also respond back very well to things that move. And I think it's very important that your interface takes advantage of that. The picture that you see here is a Kickstarter project called Cool. It's a home webcam which you can, using Neodium magnets, you can place it on the wall anywhere in your house. And based on the movements that it sees, it responds to it through its eyes. So, like when you're about to touch it or pet it, its eyes are moved. I would really suggest that you check it out. It's a great example of modern interaction design. This is a project again from my time at CID, where we designed this pillow which would help children honestly. Children often tell these funny stories, like when they're I'm sure everybody did in their own time, but those stories are never kept, and your parents later on tell you that once you were telling this sort of a story, and we sort of used that as a motivation to build this, alongside the fact that there are studies which suggest that children sleep very quickly when they are told a story, and they sleep even more quickly when they themselves are telling a story. It's sort of like how mirror neurons work. When you see somebody else yawning, you start yawning yourself. So we sort of use that to build Fluffy. Fluffy is a soft materials-based tangible interface. You see those lines on top, but here you can see in the illustrations the thread at the forehead of this. That's actually a conductive thread. And when you pet this toy, it sort of starts breathing slowly and starts going to sleep. This is my friend Hawk trying to do this in the morning of the presentation. And if you hear carefully, the motor is actually making that sound of snoring. It sort of helps the concept. This is a great example of how the medium is not more important than the outcome. This is the simplest thing I've ever built. Just has one motor in it and just some conductive thread. But I think it's very tight. Notice the garbage spinning. And this brings me to my final summation of work, where I think all of these principles sort of came together for me. This was my thesis project at CID. It's called KIN. It's an installation which basically tells the story of CID on a map. And it tells it using just a couple of interactions. So it does inhibit the user in a computer. It, in terms of storytelling, it is a storytelling tool in itself. So that makes it interesting for visitors and passers as well as for students there. And I think this is the most thought out work that I've done so far. Looking forward to this. that's mostly about the work that I've done so far. Move to the next section of the talk, which is about the tools that you can use to create these. So there are 4 things, obviously, that you could see from all of these videos that I put. There's a strong hardware component involved. There's some software. There's definitely physical design and a bit of digital depending on what you're doing. And I want to sort of tell you a little bit about it as well as make you more comfortable about how hard and how difficult these things are. I'll start with the hardware. It's not that hard actually, contrary to what a lot of people do think. A lot of people I know don't delve into hardware at all, mostly because they don't have experience in it, or they think that they'll stay at a hobbyist level and never be very proficient in it. But being at a hobbyist level is not that at all. Today, as far as electronics is concerned, you have so much on the go, and I'm a self-taught electronics enthusiast. I learned all of this from the web as well as I had a support system of ILC, which is great. But even if you don't have a support system like that, it's not that difficult to use these simple modes, and you can actually go up to much more complex things. What you see here is an Arduino, and there are modes which will actually allow you to basically sort of run a computer. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Raspberry Pi and similar things. The hard part in hardware is fabrication, and that only comes into play if you are going to be building devices on your own, which are going to be packaged, you're going to do the product design for it, and that's not the case with most people. But if that is going to be the case, yes, this is something that you will have to spend time with. That's me soldering the boards for the pressure cooker device that you saw earlier. Right. And if you look at the components on that, you notice those tiny black dots. They are actually resistors. You have to be careful with these. You have to wear a mask so that you don't sort of snort them out. You blow them out of place. But once you actually get the hang of fabrication, building these PCBs yourself becomes really easy. And being in Bangalore is a great thing for this. I think we built the whole hardware for that device in under 4,000 bucks, fabricated here in Bangalore, and hand soldered by us. Like, at that time, we couldn't have afforded going to a pick and place soldering. Brings me to the second part, software. Right? Most of you know how that works. Talk through that really quickly. The first part is creative coding. This is actually the setup of the first installation that we saw. See the code running on my system and it being projected on the installation from the top. There are a couple of languages I really recommend for creative coding. One is processing, on which this was built and which this project was built, and the second one is open frameworks. So if you come from a hardware background and you know C++, thing like open frameworks is going to be very easy for you. And if you come from a UI sort of a background, some JavaScript or some Java, right? Processing is going to be that place where you want to start. And if you are not a programmer at all, there are still languages which you can start working with. MIT Media Lab developed a language called Scratch. It's still a continuing project. It's a great place to start learning the logic of coding before you actually graduate to any of these mature platforms. And then there is code for production. I don't write that myself, so I won't be talking too much about it. But processing has moved into processing JS, which is a JavaScript-based version of it. And a lot of people are able to leverage WebGL to create really interesting stuff on it. And it's, again, you don't really have to go through those language barriers anymore. Processing JS is very similar to processing. As far as physical design goes, again, there's a software component and there's a programming component. In terms of software, I would recommend using something like that. This is a screenshot of the Cooker device again. You can do really complex surface modeling here. You can do class A surfaces. You can actually, there are some people who are into general sculpting here, so in the background, but get too deep into this, but as far as I know, you can use them to do classes of a student. You can basically build a BMW here, or you can use it for really simple prototyping, like cubes and shapes. And then fabrication, 3D printing, has grown a lot in the last couple of years. These are, of course, 3D printed, and they are production quality stuff. You don't really need to do anything more than that. And setting up this whole system of a 3D printer, a CNC mill, a laser cutter, right, it only requires a couple of labs today. And if you are a group of friends are able to put that together, you can have your own lab. And folks from Gravity Labs are here. You should talk to them later on. They have their own lab. And they have all the same. So the last is digital design, which everybody here is familiar with. When it comes to a lot of your work is going to involve moving parts, even when it's digital, it's going to involve moving parts. This is the simulation from K, and this was completely done in code. The idea here was to create these emergent areas. You see these people moving around as tadpoles, and that's actually a consequence of the code. This wasn't something that I intended to do, but if this is your first time designing something like this, I would really recommend using something like After Effects or even something like Keynote. You'll get a hang of it, you'll get a feeling of what you're trying to design, you'll be better at it. Before you actually move to code, you should try your hand with that. They're just very few. If you are going to build a tangible interface, build something which interests people, it positively enables them, and it leaves plenty of room for interaction with the If you're not if you miss out on any one of these, it's most likely going to be sort of unlucky that people will point that out. Remember that outcome is always greater than the result. A lot of people will tell you differently. Sort of pep talk that you believe that the journey is more important than winning. It's not like that at all as far as this is concerned. The medium that you use could be really simple, but the outcome has to have all these four components. It should be impressive, it should make your audience think about it. And don't get caught up in which platform you're using for prototyping. And last, use every tool. You are always going to be constrained by the number of things you have. There's always going to be a better 3D printer out there. There's always going to be that guy who writes better code than you. There's always going to be somebody who's better at visualizing. Get there if you can, and if you can't, use what you have to make something awesome. Thanks. Yeah, apart from when leader is going to be
That they already know the answer for. If you have any questions for Dhruv, please go ahead.
Regarding the project, how did you map the hand gestures to the moving of timeline or moving of the from different locations?
So the hand gestures, if you saw below that, there's a contraption in which there's a leap motion. So it basically detects the difference in hand.
That's right. But how did you, what made you think that moving the hand up and down or forward or backward or using two fingers and three fingers would be intuitive enough for the users who don't have any instruction manual beforehand?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, but when you design something which has, say, just one interaction, people more likely will figure it out. It has multiple things that it does, people won't do it. So, and that project itself was set in a very different context, in the sense that it was a project which was supposed to stay back at CID. And CID projects itself can be a school where new interactions are built. And in the context of that school, something more mysterious and magical works. It might not actually work inside a company without a simple on-screen instruction. But for that context, we actually deliberately made it like that.
Same project. So you had like a physical interaction leads to some sort of digital interaction. You also got physical points there, which are missing. Why did you decide to make that part?
So the idea was that it shouldn't be something that people have to actually go to a screen for. So CID right now has its alumni work where everybody is there. So it's just pictures. So I took that, abstracted it, and actually beat coins out. And when you move those around, you can add them. You also club different coins together to see different data. So all that data is there. The interesting bit is how the user uses it. There are multiple stories that you can tell using your installation, which I cannot tell the number of combinations you can create because they are, and that's the whole idea that people passing by sort of discover more about their area. And as an extension of that, it could be something where you have an app which is very local to the alumni or in a company which is very local to, say, HasGeek today. There are 20 people here. And they have this simple installation where they sort of update the conference that they are pinned to and where they're pinned to without invading the privacy, of course. Yes, that's it. Thanks for this.
What kind of projects do you do?
I was hoping nobody asked that. So at Uncommon, we are a design industry. We mostly do mobile. This is basically my past life. And hopefully it will be a part of the future as well. We are trying to sort of do more program work. This sort of stuff to be honest. It's barring some exceptions.
I've noticed something like if you go and study interaction design, so a lot of emphasis is given on creating these physical artifacts as well, which is rather than making digital products. So that is something that maybe
No, actually, there is a huge market for this outside India.
If it somewhat merges into product development, then there's a lot of money into it. But that doesn't really happen in India because we're still very far back on that.
Amsterdam, London, even a lot of places in the US. These are places where you find a lot of artists doing similar stuff. And that's where a lot of students from CIID or MIT actually go and work. It's crowded with students from these places.
So do you think people do this kind of work?
There are a few agencies that do similar stuff. Moonraft, yeah. Moonraft as well. Right, and there is digital city, and then that's all. And there are these gravity labs, which does the same thing. Apart from that, not really, but I know a lot of freelancers who still do these things. I keep getting freelancers who do things.
There's Touch Magic Simple, which does a lot of this stuff.
So there are companies which are doing this, and I think, like he said, when it's tied with product development, somewhere in the process, companies and people are looking to send that companies. But if it's just going to be, so most of these ideas are really new, and it doesn't become obvious right out of the box that how are they going to actually build the product. And that takes time. And I'm very hopeful that in the future it will be a part of what we do on a daily basis.
So as you said, you at current working place, you work with mostly mobile apps or digital interaction. How would you say these two fields overlap with each other, or how have learnings from this hardware or physical design helped you in digital design?
It has helped me immensely actually. And when you think about design, so I come from a pure product design background. Right? And to top that, I even come from a mechanical engineering. To me, design was much more obscure when I entered design school. And when I exited design school, computers, hardware, all of these things were still obscure. Right? But I know for a fact that my learnings right from engineering to today have sort of carried forward. If I would not have taken that journey, I wouldn't be doing the number of things that I'm able to do, or build the perspective that I'm able to do. To give you a direct answer to that, the fact that I understand programming so well is a huge advantage in what I do today.
I am able to prototype things a lot more quickly than a lot of other designers can. A lot of prototyping tools have come up which help designers prototype easily. But before they were there, I could code something more quickly. And those tools are still not as comprehensive as writing code yourself. So there are situations where you will still write code. There are situations where you will sort of look at a product, understand. So if you're just a designer, you don't really understand a product, its physical appearance, how it impacts the brand and everything. But being a product designer, you sort of get a sense of that as well. So overall, it merges well. Overall, had I just started with interaction design 7 years ago, I would not be a wholesome designer.
And that's a calling in and like the boundary between like a particular and higher problem and sort of niche it's interesting.
So what are your approaches for finding the form of the products?
So back when I was doing product design, it's exactly what any industry design would do. You look at the functionality, what it's supposed to do, and then you look at what sort of emotions is it supposed to evoke, and then you make a compromise. Not on the functionality, but usually slightly on the emotions, but you always try to merge them together and keep them very close. Depends. I used to also work in a scientific research background before. So their form wasn't common. Functionality was to emotions were not there. But I also dealt a lot into medical devices, and hospitals are a very emotional place where anything which looks sharp or which looks like something that can harm you, but not harm you, like something rigid, is not very well received. So all the medical things that I've done, which are not here in the stock, are all very soft forms. So those functions just usually.
So the flow then, that for instance you create the flow and then have it on a user test and then you iterate it with
No, so a lot of these are concepts and they aren't actual products. I think I should have sort of mentioned that before. So these are very quick prototyping concepts. Apart from everything was built in a shot in that same, edited in that same week and presented on the 50th basically. So, and that's what a great pool of individuals gives you. There were a lot of people who could just jump in and start building stuff once the context was understood.
That everything, how is telling the story? What is it?
So it's not telling children the story, the children are telling it a story. So when you're patting it and telling it a story, it's being also recorded and sent to the parents' Dropbox of mistakes. Maybe as a gift for the 18th birthday. But it's the idea was that the child tells it the story.
But that motor sounds very scary.
That will put them to sleep. You had a question?
Yes. How important would you say a college education is to creating a career in interaction design for UX design?
I'd say it's not necessary, but I would say it helps. School basically allows you to do a lot of the things that you will not be able to do in your professional life. It creates room for experimentation. It also gives you a chance, to sort of play around with other people's input. Like it happens that the schools that I've been in, KIN was completely funded by CIIT, and I used to give us a stipend which we used to pay for everything that we got. That money might not be substantial, but it's probably not a good reason to get that. But also is a much more safer space. You're not being judged because you're still tagged as a learner. Whereas when you start doing these in your professional spaces, a lot of people can't do it. There are people who are obviously outliers who have no, like our founder Rahul, he doesn't have a design. Actually, a lot of people at Uncommon
Vidhi and I are probably the two people. So it isn't important. You might be working for somebody who doesn't have them.
Okay, a follow-up question. These people that don't have degrees, how do they segue to background?
They do great work. They don't piggyback on degrees. And I don't think that's the right way to go for any work. Just the fact that I have CIE attached to my name hasn't really changed anything for me. But it does help. It opens a lot of doors and a lot of I would also say that that's changing. You could also say that you're a founder of an impressive startup. You could also be this guy who designed something which people know about, and then your degrees don't matter. Any other questions?
So, looking around at design degrees, there's a lot of confusion between. So, some places offer interaction design, some places offer user experience. So, how do you tease this apart and what is what?
I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm trying to understand the difference between interaction design as a discipline and everything related to it, like user experience design. And
so, like any field which is new, people coin their own terms, and it's the test of time that tells which stay in which tool. Right now, I know there's a lot of confusion. There's a visual designer, there's a UX designer, there's an interaction designer. And if you look at the definition of interaction design as found by Morgridge and Bergplan, they didn't actually expect that mobile phones would pick up the way they did, and interaction design would be something which is going to be at least important. What they meant for the interaction design was anybody who deals with physical products but is dedicated to designing the interaction with them, right? Not just the industry. And that has changed over time. It will continue to change. So schools will offer different things, but you can always look at the projects that they have done, the faculty that they have, and take a look at what they're going to actually be teaching. What they call it doesn't matter so much. Looks like any other questions? If nobody has any questions, so we can close for the day. Thank you so much.
Just a few announcements. One, obviously, there's food and drinks downstairs, so please help yourself. The next design open house will happen on the second week of June, not in May. It will happen in June. We'll communicate about who's the speaker is and times and stuff. And again, if anybody wants to give a talk or anybody wants to recommend anybody to give a talk on design, you can please contact me on this now after the talk. And if you have any specific feedback or you want to see some topic to be discussed or some areas to be covered in the talks, you can come with me. Thank you all for coming. Cheers.